This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special guest for you today. His name is Tim Ballard. So Tim spent more than a decade working as a special agent for the Department of Homeland Security, where he was assigned to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and deployed as an undercover operative for the U.S. Child Sex Tourism Jump Team. He also worked in that role, and since in every type of case, he's worked in basically every way you could in terms of dismantling child sex trafficking rings, right? That's kind of the easiest way to describe it. So he's worked in the United States. He's worked in multiple foreign countries to infiltrate these child sex trafficking organizations, and he's successfully dismantled dozens of these organizations and rescued children from slavery and exploitation. And while working for the government, Ballard saw that there was a whole lot more needed in the fight against child sex trafficking, and he thought he could do more. And so back in 2013, he and a team of former government operatives, they left the security of their government jobs so that they could start Operation Underground Railroad. And that is a team that Tim created that can work in any jurisdiction around the globe and in conjunction with law enforcement to rescue children directly and get them out of child sex trafficking. And so that team exists even still today, and they're doing things all over the globe. His story is depicted in a new movie that is in theaters today. As of right now, guys, you can go and watch the film today. It's called Sound of Freedom. He is actually played by Jim Caviezel, the same guy that played the lead in Count of Monte Cristo and The Passion of the Christ and some other films like that as well. But this is a film which basically depicts the latter end of his time working for the United States government, and then how he kind of went out on his own and some of the actual, operations that his team did to directly save these little kids, because there's always that dissonance between catching the pedophile but also saving the children, because you can catch the pedophile somewhat easily, but getting the children out of this degradation, out of this horrible darkness where they're being raped multiple times a day and being sold to people all over the globe, that's something that's completely different. That's what this film touches on. Guys, this is a rougher episode today, and that film is incredibly rough, but it's one of those things, it's like that movie Unplanned from back in the day. There are some things in that movie that's depicting abortion that's really, really rough, and so you might be tempted to, cover your eyes, plug your ears, and not really pay attention to it. What I would suggest is that you lean into something like this, because he made this point during the interview where it's like, look, the lead story on every newspaper across the globe should be millions of children raped today, repeatedly, incessantly. But it's not. It's, did Donald Trump say something now? Or, oh, look at this celebrity who's changing their pronouns. Like, it's all this nonsense. But this film kind of gets at the heart of what it is that we are up against as a people and as Christians. And again, as men that I'm trying to equip to be able to push back darkness. You can't push back against darkness if you don't know the darkness even exists. And so we talk about that a lot in this particular podcast. This is not an explicit podcast, so you can certainly listen to it with your children, but it is about a rough subject matter. But I think it's well worth your time and attention. So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Tim Ballard, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Thank you, sir. Good to be here.
Hey, I got a lot of ground that I want to cover with you today, but we should probably do a little bit of groundwork in terms of like setting up who exactly you are and how you got into your line of work. So you were a special agent for the Department of Homeland Security, and you did that for over a decade. But during that time, you were also assigned to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. And so I know we're covering a lot of ground there because, why'd you even want to be a cop? Why'd you go the Fed route? How'd you end up there? But I guess give us an idea about all of that. But specifically, most people in modern day don't know anything about the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. We didn't even know that thing existed. So what is that? How'd you get involved? Take that wherever you want to go to start.
Yeah, so I actually began my career at the CIA, and I wanted to combat terrorism and other kind of drug crimes and so forth. But 6 months into my position, after I left CIA, in the wake of 9/11, I jumped over to the Homeland Security investigations and put me on the border. And 6 months into that new position, I was asked to help start a child crimes unit, which was not something I was interested in. I didn't really want to do it. And it was scary to me. I didn't know, no one knew what it was. How bad is it? What's going on? We began working on the end users. There was some software had been created that allowed U.S. agents to identify people who were downloading child rape videos. And so that's where we started. And it was very successful. But the haunting part of it was you would always, seize these computers, sometimes with hundreds of thousands or even over 1 million pieces of child exploitation material. And you'd wonder where those kids are. You'd see these videos, you're crying as you're writing the reports, like, oh my gosh. People, when they think of child sex crimes or child pornography, like we used to call it, too often they think it's 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds because technically that would fit. That's not what the case. We're talking 7-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 2-year-olds, and the most grotesque things happening to them, like things your brain couldn't even comprehend. You couldn't dream up. You would think physically it would be impossible. In fact, the things I'm watching here and writing about, and you can only do that so long before you either just collapse or run away or go find those kids. How do you find the kids? Because most of them seem to be, in that time at least, were from foreign. And so the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force was kind of the hub, using the technology to find the end users. And then everything changed for me in 2006. In 2006, the laws changed in the United States with the passage of the Adam Walsh Child Protect Act. And what that did was it allowed, for the first time, allowed U.S. agents to go overseas. And if we caught Americans sexually assaulting children overseas, we could hold them accountable as if they had committed that crime on U.S. soil. And so thus began my undercover career. And I went undercover and I started working in several countries finding the kids. But the government was, unintentionally kind of torturing me because, they give me, bureaucracies. It's how they are. Like, you get a week, Tim, you have a week and a half. Go to this country, find. Well, we'd always find the kids, but I had to line it so I didn't have a crystal ball like to show up exactly when the Americans showed up. And so I'm being asked over and over, come home, come home, come home. And then by 2012, I was working a couple of cases, one in Haiti and one in Colombia, where when they said come home, I said I'm done. I can't. I got too deep. It was too big. There was over 100 kids we thought we could rescue. And that was it. And that's the basis. That's where the movie picks up, where I'm having to make that decision with my wife, and then what happened in the aftermath of that decision.
Well, Tim, I appreciate you giving us that detail. I certainly want to get into the details from the film. I tried to determine whether I wanted to ask this, but I want to go back to something that you said because I don't want it to be lost on the audience here. And it's that you had to actually watch the same materials that were being traded online as fodder between pedophiles. And I know you probably don't get asked this a lot because it's a hard question to ask, much less for you to answer. But you're watching the most degrading, sinful, evil, dark thing that you could possibly watch, here on this planet. How do you process that? Because yes, it was part of your job, but I've talked to people that work at like television networks that, have porn channels. And so they have to like watch all these different things to make sure there's edits, and they're just 8 to 10 hours a day. They have pornographic images in their head, and it's like, it's hard for them just to operate. And this is beyond that, because these aren't two adults that are being paid. These are children that are being raped. Take me back to just how you process that, because I'm sure even to this day, it's not something that you can just compartmentalize in your brain. No?
Oh, it is so hard. The very first case I worked, I remember one of the very first videos I had to look at, and then you have to write it in detail. That you have to like describe it for the prosecution. And the very first video I saw was three little boys, probably about 7, 5, and 3, and they were all three of them completely naked with an old naked man, and he was raping all of them. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what we were calling child porn. You're supposed to call it child exploitation material, child rape videos. I didn't know what that was, I guess. It was like the first case, like, here it is. Like, wait, what? And I remember I fell on my knees and I dry heaved. I thought I was going to throw up, but I dry heaved into the trash can under my desk. And then I just started sobbing, and I jumped in my car and I drove to my kids' school. I had 4 or 5 kids at the time about that same age that looked like that. I had 2 boys that looked just like those kids, blonde hair, blue eyes, and then a little girl. And they're probably at the same ages. And I rushed to the school to pick up my two boys. They were probably like one in kindergarten, maybe, and the other one's maybe first or second grade. I remember running in there crying. I said, they got a dentist appointment. I just had to get them. And I just took them out, took them home. My wife was like, what on earth is going on? Why are you here? I'm just sobbing. And I said, you won't believe what's happening. You won't believe what's happening in this world, and no one knows it. Because it wasn't like that was a one-off video. I mean, there's millions of videos just like the one I described being transferred internationally and even mostly domestically. I say mostly domestically because the United States is the number one demand. We're the number one consumer for child rape videos in the world. So that was the beginning of it. And then after that, it's like, it's therapy. It's prayer. It's how do you compartmentalize? How do you watch this stuff and not superimpose your own children's faces on those videos? Because that's what you naturally are going to do. And that's when a battle within began. I had to decide, am I going to stay doing this or run away?
Well, so as you just alluded to, you got to a point where it looked like your runway with the U.S. government doing this work was at an end. And so you decided to go out on your own. You started a private foundation called Operation Underground Railroad. And so this organization is focused on the work of rescuing children all over the world from child sex trafficking. I guess what led to this decision? You talked about it a little bit already, but what led to that final decision? Like, no, we're going to burn the ships and we're going to do this? Because some might say, well, yeah, you probably had some restrictions working for the feds, but maybe you had a lot more resources, or perhaps from the outside looking in, that's not exactly how it would be. So take us through that decision-making process.
Well, it is true to say, if you quit, you have freedom from restraints and bureaucracy, but you have no money. And that is an enormous piece. These are expensive, very expensive operations. So it was definitely, most people told me, you're crazy. You're crazy to leave this. But what happened to me is I was working two different cases I mentioned earlier, but one was in Colombia, and the film Sound of Freedom is based on the Colombia one, but something else was happening simultaneous in Haiti. In Haiti, we learned about a little boy. He was a U.S. citizen named Gardy Marty, who had been, the family had moved back to Haiti, they're Haitian, and he was kidnapped at 2 years old. Kidnapped, trafficked, disappeared. And I learned about this case. I thought I could make it a U.S. case because the kid's a U.S. citizen. I met the family, became friends with the father, and I promised him, we will never stop until we find him. We'll never stop. Simultaneous to that, I'm in Colombia. This is all about 2011, 2012. I'm in Colombia doing consulting with the federal police there on how to infiltrate child trafficking rings. And we decided to do a real case, so committed to a real case, identified locations, identified targets, and we believed we could rescue 100 kids. So my whole life was consumed by these two cases. And about the same time in 2013, I was told, cancel both, you're done. You don't have jurisdiction, we don't have budget, we don't have this, we don't have that. And it was so frustrating. I remember coming home at one point after I was told that I couldn't stay, and there was like a big shipment of like combat boots that all the agents were given that nobody needed, and I counted up how much money that would be, and it's just like no one can. It's no. I'm not blaming any one person it's the system, right? It's just like it's a big, slow, bulky kind of system, and it's just like kids deserve better than this. There's no reason why, and so it was both of those cases that made us, my wife and I, do what would be irrational. It's really irrational, but it's like I remember my wife had a conversation with me. This was in December of 2013 while this was all happening, and she said, "Do you think if you were to go on both those cases that you would save kids?" I said, "I know I would. I know we would." She said, "Well, this shouldn't be a hard decision then. You just got to quit your job to do it." And I was very cowardice. I was like, "There's no way. We got 6 kids at that point. 6 kids. How do I feed them?" I was able to make a connection with Glenn Beck, and Glenn Beck was able to raise the money for these operations. But that was only going to last maybe 8 months before that would be done. And I'll be honest, the second week of December 2013, I was like, there's no way I'm doing this. And it was my wife who we had enough experiences, spiritual experiences, that we would call a calling even, right? That we had to go do this. And I'm truly freaking out. Like I'm having anxiety like you can't believe. First of all, I don't have to cover the government. I'm going to have to go convince the police to keep working with me, even though I've quit. I don't have a badge anymore. Like there's so many variables. And she grabs me like this and she says, listen to me. She said, I will not let you jeopardize my salvation by not doing this. And that ended the argument. That ended the debate. And I quit 2 days later and off we went to Colombia and Haiti. And in both cases were insane. In Haiti, we rescued 28 kids on that op, 2 of which I ended up adopting. So they're my kids now. That's another story to be told. And then in Colombia, we ended up rescuing over 120 kids in maybe the biggest operation I've ever heard of.
Well, there's so much detail there, Tim, and we'll get into some more of that when we talk about the film. But I guess just in general, I think people generally know that there is a problem with child sex trafficking across the globe. But how prevalent is it exactly? Because it seems like it would be impossible to get real, accurate numbers. But just try to give the listeners an idea, like how prevalent is this, not only in the U.S., but worldwide? What kind of money are we talking about? What types of conditions? Go.
So those numbers are pretty well established by U.S. State Department, Department of Labor, UN, so forth. So they're pretty as close as possible. But it's believed that there are to break it down, there are 27 million people enslaved today, men, women, and children. It's labor, organ harvesting, and sex trafficking. 6 million of those are believed to be children, and then of those 6 million. 2 million are forced directly into the commercial sex. The others are labor and organ harvesting. So what does that produce? All those combined produce, or the money made off the backs of these slaves. And by the way, there's more people enslaved today than ever before in the history of the world. We've never seen so much slavery. And it's about $150 billion a year. $150 billion is made every year off the backs of that entire population of slaves. And it's the fastest growing criminal enterprise for sure. The United States, we are the number one consumer of child rape videos. We're also in the top 3 for destination countries. Kids are being funneled trafficked right through our southern border because you can just walk them across. I mean, we're facilitating it, not only by horrible policy, but just by ignorance amongst the populace that we don't understand what's going on. It's time for this to not be hidden anymore. It needs to come out in the open.
So I think a lot of people would, it's just crazy to even think about that. It's hard to wrap your mind around that type of number, but like compare that to what you get from a profit from a huge company like Amazon or Apple. That number always outdoes these huge companies. And so it's just hard for us to think about. And you're right, as a father, you do superimpose those images or even those nightmares of your kids' faces on those kids where this is happening to them. But without giving away any tradecraft, give us an idea of how you or any agency is able to infiltrate these child sex trafficking conglomerates. And I guess discuss that dissonance between focusing on catching the pedophiles, catching the rapists, and saving the children. Because that even came up early in the film to where it's like, hey, we caught another pedophile, but it's like, hey, where are the kids? And so like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier to get the bad guys.
Right.
And that's because of, honestly, really amazing technology that law enforcement has utilized over the last 20 years that is able to go in and identify in the public space online, it's not hacking. And you can identify these markets. And it's astonishing. I think in the last 10 years, we've seen an increase by 5,000% of these kind of images of children being raped. And that's just growing and growing and growing as sex addiction grows and grows, and people start wanting children. Finding the kids is a whole different game. It's a whole different approach, and that's where my focus began to get into. Post 2006, but I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't grasp it. The tools weren't available. The jurisdictional limitations, because once you get involved with the kids, it's all transnational. human trafficking knows no borders and boundaries. I mean, in the last just 3 years alone, we've had 85,000 unaccompanied minors, thousands of them under 5 years old, unaccompanied, show up at our southern border and released to whatever sponsor shows up. I mean, it's transnational. So when you start putting borders and boundaries and jurisdictional limitations on it, you can't combat it. And that's what drove me out of the government eventually, because it's like, well, Tim, you can't work this case because it's on the wrong side of the border. Like, I don't give a hell. Why would we care what side of the border? Once you see it, but if people don't see it, it's easy for someone to sit back and just say, no, you can't. You've got to see it. That's why this movie is so important, because you see it, you feel it. You feel what you would feel if this was a real kid you're looking at. And so once you get into that, I'll call it a beautiful trap, because you actually don't want to be there, but you need to be there. Then you start getting into irrational service, I'll call it, where it's like, look, I got to meet my maker someday, and I know too much, and I can't not, like my wife said, my salvation may be in jeopardy here. Like, I cannot sit back and do nothing. And it's like Edmund Burke said, the evil triumphs when men and women do nothing. That's it.
I think you're right, and that's a great time to actually segue into the movie. So we'll leave your personal story there, because some of the details do come in the movie. And so the movie is called The Sound of Freedom. Guys, if you're listening to this right now on time, this is in theaters right now. So this is a movie that kind of details your story of how you made this transition from the federal government to doing these really on the ground operations to try and save children that are being ritually enslaved and raped. And so there's a backstory to this movie. And so I can't think of another movie like this. It's made by Angel Studios, so the same studio that is doing The Chosen. But take me through the backstory. Like, whose idea was it to have this film made? How did Jim Caviezel become part of the project, because he plays you in the film? Kind of give us all that information.
Sure. So after that operation went down, the big hit that you'll see in the film on the island, I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to spoil it.
Right. There are some spoilers here, guys, that you have to see the film to get, so we're not going to be getting into all those details, but go ahead.
But it made the national news, actually international news. It made its way to Scott Pelley at CBS News. And it was it's kind of an astonishing story. It kind of just came and went. But like, for those who are watching, it's like, wait, what happened? A bunch of kids got rescued on some little island? And then, later on you learn about Epstein Island, and you realize, yeah, there's lots of islands out there, right? Literal and figuratively speaking. And it kind of, it got the attention of several production companies. And we were, all of a sudden, after that story ran, we got hit up by several. We turned down even the idea of working with most of them, because it's a hard thing, because Hollywood, right? I have a job because of Hollywood, and that's not a good thing, right? I mean, the demand exists. Sex addiction that leads to everything else. It can be argued that that's a big part of the problem. And so here they are coming on to my story. So it was, no, we're not comfortable. Finally, we met Eduardo Verastegui and Alejandro Monteverde, and they had just finished a movie called Little Boy. And when they showed us the movie and then invited us to sign up to tell our story. And my wife and I were so overcome by the beauty of this film, Little Boy, that we said yes. So they race up to my home. They take me up to the mountains of Park City and tie me to an audio device, a recording device. And I sit there for 2 days and just cry my eyes out and just tell everything. They send me home. I come back 2 days later, and they have this, 1,000 Post-its on a wall with the story arc. And this is what we're going to do. And then they left, and I did some research, and it said 4% of movies go from at concept go to big screen. So I'm thinking it's never going to happen. And then a year and a half, maybe 2 years later, they show up. Hey, we're going to film this summer. And you don't get to choose, but you can request, who would you want to play you? And immediately I just said Jim Caviezel, and they were taken aback, because they said, no, Jim's tall, dark, and handsome, and you're stocky and not tall, dark, and handsome. Yeah. I said, well, what does that matter? And they said, well, at the end of the movie, there's this kind of cool transition where they actually, if you forgot you were watching a real story, right at the end, they show the real footage from the scenes you saw depicted earlier. And they said, that's an important part, that someone has to look kind of like you. And I said, look, one, I don't trust Hollywood. I don't even know if I trust you guys yet. I'm still watching. But I do know this, that Jim Caviezel loves Jesus and I love Jesus. And so that's a really good starting point. And he's a badass actor. One of my favorite movies is The Count of Monte Cristo. And that was it. And they said, okay. They could tell I was pretty passionate about it. And they hit up Jim and he took the role. And they didn't do a horrible job of making him look like me, right? It's kind of
you got to bleach the tips a little bit, and so it kind of worked out all right. And I remember that scene at the very end, and I was like, yeah, that actually the resemblance does come in there. But at the very end of the film, after the credits roll, Jim Caviezel does his little spiel about, hey, you should support this movie, buy tickets for other people and all that, and I'm all for it. He said this movie was actually made 5 years ago, and he kind of alluded to the fact that y'all had a lot of problems kind of getting it released. And I mean, we've heard of studios making movies and then shelving them for a little bit and releasing them when it makes the most sense. But 5 years, like half a decade, like what in the world happened, Tim?
It's spiritual warfare. I'll tell you that. Like there's a lot of forces that do not want this movie out because nothing makes sense. I remember the first day they shot, I went to the set just like 2 or 3 times. But I was there. I wanted to be there on day one, and I remember I was sitting with Jim Caviezel in a hotel patio in Bogota, Colombia, and the producer walks in and says, $8 million just fell through. Like, we can't film this tomorrow. I'm like, what do you mean you can't start filming tomorrow? Everything's set up and ready. And he says, and this is Eduardo Verástegui. This is a man. He was tested right here. He says, I only have $1 million. And the production company, if I give it to them, they'll start. But that means I got to raise another $12 million or something in the next 2 months, or I'm going to be sued. And I'm going to be liable for this million. And he said, he prayed. He said, God said, go for it. He was testing him. He did it. He dropped the money. The movie began, and sure enough, in the 11th hour, all the money was raised, right? The movie gets completed. It's supposed to come out in 2020. It's owned by Fox. Fox actually was the production company. Then Disney bought Fox, and Disney was not going to put it anywhere.
Right.
Disney was going to shelve it.
Right.
And so Eduardo had to work his magic and pray to God that somehow he could wrest control of it out of the hands of Disney. He was able to do that. Then it went through several other hands, people who had the rights to, and nothing felt right. Nothing took off. And then the coolest story, you mentioned The Chosen. Last year I was on the set of The Chosen. I got invited randomly to go tour the set in Goshen, Utah, which is a replica of Jerusalem. It's beautiful. And I'm on the set, and it was the only day during that 4-week or 5-week period they were filming there that the CEO of Angel Studios visited the set. The only day happened to be the day I was there. And his name's Neil Harmon. And I recognized him because we had worked on something or tried to like years earlier. And I said, Neil, what's up? I haven't seen you for years. I told him, I said, hey, they have this movie. And looking back, it's such a beautiful moment that it happened here. By the time the rights deal ended and Angel looked at it, they had 5 days to make a deal if we wanted to get the trailer up for their next movie, which was called His Only Son, which is a phenomenal film. And somehow the team, in 5 days, if you can believe it, from beginning to end negotiation, they'd signed the deal. Angel took it, and now it's out, and it's killing it. It's outselling 3-1 Indiana Jones. We're selling out theaters right now, and July 4th is the big day. So the whole thing was a miracle. Yes, lots of opposition, but in the end, heaven won out.
I think that's great that it's almost better that you had that resistance, because just like anything in life, when there's a little bit of resistance, whatever's on the other side of that is going to be well earned and well worth the sacrifice. I've seen this film. I really appreciate your team sending me a screener for this so that I could watch it. This is what I'll say about the film. It's very rough. And I don't mean rough like editing. I mean like the subject matter. It's so heavy and so rough from the very beginning, like really, really rough, very disturbing. Not explicitly, just so nobody misunderstands me. Certainly not as explicit as a film like this could have been, but very punchy. I found myself, Tim, fighting back, albeit unsuccessfully, angry tears for much of the film because even from the very beginning, no spoilers, I have a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old son. And so I was seeing me as the father in that opening scene, and I was seeing my boys as the children in that opening scene. Take us through the creative decision making to make it so raw, because for me, I think films and people that talk about this, they sanitize the subject matter way too much, and so people can kind of easily move on past it. They just kind of go, oh shucks, isn't that unfortunate, and then they go grab their latte and their lunch. But this film is sticky. It's been stuck in my brain, and it's like I can't get it out, and I think that's part of the point, right?
Absolutely, it is. It has that effect. I mean, I don't even watch it. If I go to like a screening, I stay outside until they tell me to come in. I can't. I sweat. I cry. Well, they filmed so many scenes in the very places where things happened. So for me, it was very, very. It triggered my PTSD quite a bit. That's on a personal level, though. But for the general audience, I'll say this: these guys are geniuses. Alejandro Monteverde, the director and writer, he's a genius because he has to tell the story. And I told him, I said, I will not make this movie if you create any pedophile material. In other words, if you create any material that would turn on a pedophile, you can't show it. You can't show it anything.
Yep.
And isn't it crazy, Kyle? You saw they didn't. You never actually saw a scene where a child's being abused, and yet it punches you in the stomach.
Yep.
Because it's how the creative they were. I won't get into what the particulars, how you'll see it when they watch it. But he also used light. He wanted to make every scene. This was by design in the beginning. Every scene's like a portrait, with using lights and darks, and you can see it every scene, even in the trailer. Just watch the trailer. It's all intentional to kind of almost distract you into a beautiful scene, even if the scene is about something ugly. It was his way to make it digestible, so you don't. We want people to be at the edge of their seats, but we don't want them to go so far to the edge that they run out of the theater. So he kind of plays with you. He keeps you there. And it's a thriller. I mean, it's a story that once you get in, you can't get off that you can't get off. You want to see what's going to happen. So they care about the cause. That's why they did this. How do we get people to come and stay and feel, but not feel to the point where they want to run away, but instead they want to engage at the end, engage and join the fight.
It's funny to hear you say that because that's obviously what he did. If that was the bullseye he was shooting for, then he nailed it because I'm one of those lean forward, let's go type people. And we all see ourselves in Hollywood thrillers. We all put ourselves in the film somehow. It definitely strikes that chord. Well, let's actually talk about that a little bit because right from the beginning, it says based on a true story. And if you've watched any films for any length of time, that word based means it could be very loosely based on the truth, or it could be really, really, really close to the truth and everything in between. How much of the storyline of the movie, again, all of you in the audience, you need to go see this film, but as they walk into the theater, how much of the storyline is legit, how it went down with you, and then how much of it is like Hollywood, they had to do this to where it, looked cool and sounded cool?
Yeah. So I will say first that, Caviezel definitely makes me look way more badass than I am.
Way more tall, dark, and handsome too.
Way more tall, dark, and handsome as well. But the I'll tell you this: every bad guy is real. Every kid is real. I could point you to them. I could show you them. And they had to cut the movie down, but there was about 5-minute segment at the end that says, "Where are they now? Who are they?" And you see, and I love that. I wish they didn't take it out, but it shows every bad guy, every good guy, every kid is accounted for. There were exactly 54 rescued on that island. Every bad guy is a real bad guy. Now, in order to protect identities, they did merge 2 stories together. So you can find the two main children that you see the most in the film. I mean, these are real people, and they're still minors today. They're teenagers, but so we had to be very careful to tell just enough of their story, and then they brought in another true story, then merged them, so you couldn't follow them all the way. But I would give it, I'd say 85% of it is is extremely accurate.
Okay, well, I've got to echo. I really wish at the end of the film there would have been a "Where are they now?" because that would have substantiated it a little bit more. Because obviously you're wondering, is that really the little girl? Is that really the little boy? Not in the film. Obviously, those are actors and actresses, but it's in theaters right now, as you said. This is kind of the big release day as of today. If you're listening to this on time, I guess before we move forward, what is the best way for people to support this project outside of just seeing it themselves? Is there something riding on the success of this film? Like, is there a project 2 or 3 after this that the studios are just trying to wait and see, like, hey, let's see how this does in theaters before these other projects come out? Tell us about all that.
Yeah, absolutely. The best thing people can do is just keep filling theaters up. Right. At the end of the movie, in the theaters, there'll be an opportunity. A QR code will come up. People can even put their phones up now and buy tickets for others. Right. It's a pay it forward program because we want 2 million people that week, but we want 100 million people to watch it by the end. And yes, to answer your question, we have multiple documentaries because people are going to ask, how real is this? Well, how about watch some real documentaries about our operations? One of the documentaries was actually filmed back in 2014, and it is, in fact, the story you see Son of Freedom. There's a documentary about what happened on that island raid. The film shows 54 rescued. It was actually over 120 that were rescued. It was actually underreported in the movie, which doesn't usually happen.
Right.
And then also Son of Freedom 2 is in pre-production. The script is written, and so they're already excited to see. So it's important this thing does well because it'll produce more. And it'll also support a lot of different organizations that I'm helping right now. I want to get funding. I want to get resources to not just Operation Underground Railroad, but many others who are doing amazing work. That's my goal is to get it out.
Guys, it is in the show notes. You can check the links there. Go and check it out. It is well worth your time. I will tell you, it's a rough film. Like I told some guys, I was like, look, if you take your wives, make sure they don't walk in expecting, Finding Nemo Part 3. Like, make sure they understand that this is a tough film, but it's something that we need to see and that we need to watch. And Tim, we have a global listenership to this podcast, thankfully. And what are some of the easiest ways for parents? I want to transition away from the film. Like, let's just get practical, brass tacks. What are some of the easiest ways for parents and for common citizens to be more vigilant about preventing child abduction and child sex trafficking? I tell people all the time, your children do not need smartphones because it's not just about what you're giving them access to. It's about who you're giving access to them. Because these pedophiles will go on these chat sites meant for teenagers and social media, and they will pose as 16-year-old boys and they're 45-year-old men, and they're trying to do meetups. And it's like, parents, this isn't about your kid being the only weirdo in school without an Instagram or a TikTok account. This is about protecting them from the stuff that they'll see and protecting them from other people. But that's just what I say. Are there other things that are just easy for parents and common citizens to do?
Well, you hit it. You hit it exactly on the head, Kyle. It's access points. It's all about access points, and it's always been about access points. But access points used to be when if you're a parent my age or older, access points meant playground, meant park, meant it's no longer that. There's a million access points, and if you're my age or older, you don't even know what it's like. You don't remember that because you don't have a memory of it because you weren't there. You didn't grow up in a time as an adolescent or a child in the age of this digital age. So what's happening, the most simple thing parents can do is know what's on your kid's phone. Don't give them an iPhone, by the way, until they're responsible. And if and when you do, give it to them like you're giving them a car, teaching them everything about it, because they can kill themselves or kill someone else. And so but the parents don't do that. They just can't imagine that this game is anything but the kid playing the computer. Because when I was a kid, we played Atari or Nintendo or whatever. I mean, you're playing the computer, right? No longer are they playing the computer, mom and dad. They're playing Uncle Skippy 2 counties away, who's pretending to be, like you said, a 15-year-old or something. And it's happening constantly. I executive produced a documentary called It's Happening Right Here. And we get into all the nitty gritty, all the details, real stories of what happens, how kids get hurt and abducted and abused here in the United States. And I'm going to have that documentary ready to run and fully available in the wake of Sound of Freedom. So look for that.
We'll certainly be looking for that as well. So that's the easy stuff. Are there maybe some more difficult to implement ways for parents and common citizens to be more vigilant about preventing child abduction and child sex trafficking? You hear about some people that are like, "Hey, if you're on I-35 or I-44, I live in Oklahoma, so I-35, I-44, and I-40 all connect right in the middle of Oklahoma City," and they're like, "Those are thoroughfares for child trafficking, other sex trafficking, things like that. Here are some hand signals that people might try to show you to say that they're in trouble or something like that." What are some of those more difficult things to look for?
Well, there's a human ability of a decent person just knows something's off, right? There's 100 signs in a kid that's not supposed to be, or if they're somewhere they're not supposed to be. It's about looking for it. We after years of petitioning, finally, flight attendants get training. What to look for, and it's the same thing. But the bottom, the kid doesn't belong. The kid is something. It's more intuitive, honestly, even spiritual, intuitive than anything else. But the problem is if you're not looking. But after flight attendants got the training, they'd find cases all the time. They'd see this kid doesn't want to be there. I don't know if the kid's looking away. The kid doesn't look like the person. Doesn't look like a family member. And they've rescued kids. Wait for the kid to go to the bathroom, put a Post-it on the window, on the mirror. Hey, come talk to me around the corner. And the girls, this is a true story. And the girl said, "This guy kidnapped me. I don't even know who he is." And they have the cops waiting when they landed. But this we could be doing more rescues if people are paying attention, and don't just walk away like, something tells me I'm not gonna. No, pick up the phone and call. It might seem like a little piece, but it might be the last piece of a 1,000-piece puzzle that was required to take out a whole ring. So people talk. If you see something that makes you feel uncomfortable, even if you can't fully articulate it, just pick up the phone, call the police, tell security.
Yeah, part of it is getting out of your phone. I mean, I've seen videos literally of people that get mugged. They don't even know they're being mugged because they're looking at their phone. And so it's having spatial awareness, having situational awareness, seeing what's going on around you. Now, one thing that I want to talk about as well, anytime you talk about child sex trafficking or things like this, automatically people will speed up and go 100 exits later to talk about QAnon and all this. There's a cabal of nefarious but extremely powerful, wealthy group of people that engage in pedophilia and drink children's blood and all this kind of stuff. But the thing about it is every time something like this happens, Tim, people just start being quiet. Epstein Island happens. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison, but we don't know any of the names of the people that are in the Black Book. And Epstein apparently killed himself in prison, where that wasn't really supposed to be able to be possible. These things happen always around the trafficking of children for sex. And so it's easy to just dismiss it and say, "Oh, that's just QAnon stuff." But then, this is actually happening. But yeah. Is there a nefarious force of people that wear masks in the woods and rape kids that are controlling the levers of government? And it's such a silly question to even ask, but there's so much evidence that would point to the fact that, yeah, there are secret societies that are doing stuff like this.
I mean, it's complex, right? And
right.
I'll try to tackle it. Yes, I mean, when we found out that Epstein had been colluding, entertaining, hanging out with top intelligence officials. Do I believe it was a blackmail kind of situation? Absolutely. I don't know that, but do I think that there's something going on? People were pulling the strings there. Yes, I do. Do I think he killed himself? No, I don't. Again, this is not me being conspiratorial. This is I can't say I know these things, but I know enough about these things that it doesn't add up. And most prominently, or most importantly, I think, or relevantly, as you said. You can't sell someone without a buyer. What are you talking about? Like in the Maxwell case, where are the buyers? She couldn't have been found guilty unless buyers were identified. You couldn't make a legal argument. And where's that list and why? Who's hiding it? Now, I'll say this. I'll also add the other side of that coin is I think the QAnon movement has done a lot of damage. And I think some of the bad guys, I wouldn't be surprised if pedophiles and traffickers and people supporting that for whatever reason were some of the main pushers of QAnon. Why? Because it's discredited us. People have used those arguments to discredit me. And they try to say, it's not real, it's not really happening. Here's an example, right? Okay, there's these dumbs like underground tunnels and kids' blood being whatever, they drink their blood or whatever it is, right? Well, okay, it's so fantastical and sensational, and we've never identified any dumbs under any cities. And so it's discredited. However, at the same time, I'm working cases in the Middle East and Africa where little children are being kidnapped and having their blood taken out by witch doctors for satanic ritualistic stuff. We took down just this last year in Western Africa. In fact, I've posted about this, some really disturbing footage of what we call baby factories, where they kidnap girls between 13 and 17, usually mentally handicapped girls, rape them incessantly. And so they're producing all these babies. They take the babies, they sell the babies' hearts for $250,000 to the black market, or they sell to a pedophile group, or they sell them, and this is infants. These are like, 1 week old babies, or they'll sell them to witch doctors who then, again, they'll suck their blood and sell their blood to people who want to drink it, or they'll cut the genitalia off the babies or the children and hang it over, in their business because the gods will bless them. This is very real and it's happening all the time. So my ability to attack that is hugely hurt by these crazy stories that aren't happening with Hillary Clinton and Tom Hanks and all these people being named in these underground cities. So we need to get to the truth, because the truth is bad enough. The truth is still the worst thing in the world. Don't exaggerate it and allow us to be discredited, and thus hurting our work.
I would agree with that. And it's the capital T truth, because yes, it's sensational whenever you see a TikTok video where this guy lays out a 4-minute argument as to how Tom Hanks is a pedophile and how he's constantly using hand signals. And could he be? Yes. Do you have direct evidence of it? No. But it's that type of thing to where it's like, the focus should be on getting the people that are actually doing this right now, not the biggest name person who will make the most headlines. Because guess what? For the child, it doesn't matter if they're being raped by somebody with, an Oscar award or just somebody that lives on their block. It's the worst. It's the same for them. It's terrible for them, which kind of leads me to this. This is kind of rough for a lot of people. And a lot of people get really, really uncomfortable when I talk about this. But the automatic death penalty for child rapists. In this country, I just saw yesterday, a thing came up on my news feed. There was a young boy that raped a 4-year-old, or there was a man that raped a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old. He got 180 days in jail. 180. Okay. And so for me, I know we've seen the state of Florida, the great Governor DeSantis, they've signed off on legislation that would allow for the death penalty for people that have, for pedophiles that have raped children. For me, I don't understand why more people aren't for that. I'm for death penalty for rape of any kind, because you're holding down an image bearer of Christ and you're forcibly penetrating them against their will. Other than killing them, there's nothing worse that you can do to a person. But for somebody to rape a child and get, basically a holiday in a state prison or a federal prison, it just seems crazy to me. Like, should we be advocating for that? Do you support measures like that?
I absolutely do. I take exception with one little thing you said. Yeah. You said there's only one thing worse, killing them. I don't agree. I right. think it's actually, you probably agree with me.
Yeah, you have to live with it if you don't get killed.
I think that there's nothing worse. I think death is way better than, because I'm very Christian. The afterlife is the real life anyway, and so when you have that perspective, but I believe I've seen little children be raped, and I saw what happened to them, and one man killing another man is not as bad, in my opinion, as raping a 4-year-old, a child. And absolutely, I applaud 100% what Governor DeSantis is doing. If you believe in capital punishment at all, you have to believe it. It applies to people who would rape a baby.
And so, I guess even whenever I was thinking about that question, Tim, it's like, why aren't there vigilantes just going around killing pedophiles, or are there? Is that just not covered in the news? Because I feel like you see these Hollywoodized versions of a guy that's an adult, and he finds the man that used to sexually assault him whenever he was a child, and then he beats him up and that type of a thing. But of all the crimes that happened, that would be the one that I would be cheering on the most. But I guess I wonder why people aren't more fired up about this.
It's because they don't know it exists, and that's a huge problem. I mean, coming home from rescue operations, for the last 18 years, and you're in it, you're seeing it, you're with these victims, these children, and then you come home and look at the headlines. Are you kidding me? This is the headline. It's first of all, it's just entertainment. It's not even real. The headlines never match the stories. It's just, tribal attacks and blue versus red and whatever. And it's like, can we just make the headline every day, at least one headline? Children are being raped in mass. Millions of children are. Let's make that the headline until we start solving it, and then we can resume with our blue and red kind of tribal wars. It's very frustrating. Why won't people talk about it? One, because we discussed earlier, it's hard. I've been turned down by many media because our audience doesn't want to hear this. I'm like, okay, well, tell it's a little kid getting raped every day, down in wherever. And then two, there's a contingent. I mean, if there's 2 million children in a commercial sex trade, that means there's how many millions of people, men, who want to abuse those children. Those people are in high places. They're in low places. They're in every place. So there is definitely a movement to not let it get out. I mean, there's a reason that our movie gets shelved, right? People don't want it out. There are powerful people, I believe, that don't want these things talked about. They want to discredit these things. But until we get loud, we're never going to solve it. Until people see it and millions see it and stand up and say enough is enough. And I really think that the best opportunity ever that I know of for that to happen is this film, Sound of Freedom. I think these guys are geniuses. These filmmakers are amazing. And I think more people will learn about human trafficking and modern day slavery because of this film than anything else.
I would have to echo that for sure. Well, Tim, I've got one more question for you today before we get you out of here. I know you got a lot more of these to do. How can sheepdogs get involved with fighting against this? Because, my guys in my audience, I can feel them right now. They're chomping at the bit. When they see this film, whenever they hear some of the real details, they're going to be fired up and ready to go. How can we channel that outside of just, hey, buy your buddy a ticket to the film as well? How can we channel these sheepdogs in a direction to actually fight against this?
Well, I personally, there's 2 organizations. I founded Operation Underground Railroad. That's an organization that, you can support. It's various ways. We've worked in 30 countries, every state, and we're doing everything we can. I'm the CEO of something called the Nazarene Fund, which helps persecuted Christians all throughout the world. And we also do a lot of anti-trafficking work. That was founded by Glenn Beck, and I serve as the CEO there. So go to the NazareneFund.org. Those are 2 organizations, but there's many. The best thing people can do if they really want to get in is find an organization, and there's many of these. Find one that fits you and sign up as a volunteer. See if you can become an operator. Bring your skills, bring your talents, and let's see how we can use you.
I think that'd be great, guys. I will make sure there's a link to that in the show notes as well. But we've covered a lot of ground today. I know this is a heavy subject for a lot of people, but that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
I just thank you, Kyle. I thank you. And you're one of the few, frankly, relatively speaking, in the media that will talk about this and get into the weeds of it. And ask the hard questions. If we don't ask the hard questions, we don't get the answers, which will be the solution. And so thank you for doing that. I hope others will follow your example.
Absolutely. Tim Ballard, thank you for coming on Undaunted.Life, a Man's podcast.
Thank you.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Tim Ballard. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got 3 links for you today. We talked about them in the show. I've got a link to Operation Underground Railroad. I've got a link to where you can go and check out the Sound of Freedom. You can buy tickets there. You can look at the trailer. You can share it around with friends. You can do that from there. And then also a link to the Nazarene Fund. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. Also, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is our song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.